Electricity supply in Ghana could be disrupted soon. This is due to the threats by Ghana's independent power producers who have rejected a government proposal to restructure a $1.4 billion debt owed them. Now, the head of the Ghana Independent Power Producers Chamber said that if the government did not fulfill its commitments, they would not be able to guarantee the production of electricity. The group said that its members are already in default and incurring penalties for having accumulated significant arrears with their suppliers. Now, this comes in the middle of Ghana's attempts to finalize a $3 billion IMF loan and the country's request for a restructuring of its bilateral debts via the G20's Common Framework vehicle. Almost 60% of Ghana's thermal power generation capacity is from independent power producers. Joining me now from Accra, Ghana is Emmanuel Amoah-Darkwah. He is an economist and partner at advisory firm C-Kadd Global. Emmanuel, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So when we look at it by the numbers, what the Ghanaian government owes the independent power producers, about $1.4 billion, is almost half of what the government is asking of from the IMF in terms of what it wants to borrow. So I think the first question we'd all ask is, how did this happen? How did we get to the point where the government, which possibly will be governments at different levels, is owing independent power producers $1.4 billion?
Okay, thank you so much and good morning to our viewers. If you look at the whole value chain of energy in Ghana, there's huge debt. So from fuel supply through to power generation to power transmission and power distribution, there are hanging debts that have accumulated over the period. And so it's as a result of the kind power mix we have in Ghana. As you mentioned in your preamble, thermal is huge in Ghana, contributing about 66% to our generation mix. And so because of these indebtedness that the government of Ghana have in terms of their commitment to these independent power producers, it has accumulated over the period of time. And also because of the foreign exchange losses, all these independent power producers, they are paid in Ghana cedis, but they also have to, meet their financial obligation in foreign currency. So once there is a depreciation of the Ghana cedi, it affects them. They incur a lot of foreign exchange losses. And so there's a multiplicity of factors that have culminated into the huge debt we have seen in the energy sector.
Okay, so it's easy for us to say the government of Ghana, almost like an umbrella term, but that means ministries, departments, agencies, parastatals, those are the people who are owing right now, or we should continue in terms of it's the Ghana government. What does that really mean in terms of who owes the independent power producers?
And so this is how it works. Let's start from the fuel supply. And so Ghana, we have the Jubilee field, we have the 10 field, and we have the Sankofa field. And so these fuel suppliers give gas to the independent power producers. At the power generation level, we have the VRA and then largely the IPPs. For power transmission, we have the GRIDCO, the Ghana Grid Company. And then for the power distribution, we have the Electricity Company of Ghana and then NEDCO. So that is how the value chain is arranged. And so at every level of the value chain, there is some level of debts that have been incurred. If you look at what happened in Ghana in the past 10 years, because of the power challenges we had to shift from hydro and its reliance on hydro because it was not at the time coming forth with generation of power. And so we moved a lot of thermal production. And so these thermal producers, they rely heavily on the gas that is produced on our fields to fuel their generators, and then they further transmit it to GRIDCO. Then GRIDCO will also further transmit it to ECG and then NEDCO. So that is how the value chain is arranged. And so at every level, they've seen some level of, indebtedness. And of course, for ministries, departments, and agencies, the Ministry of Finance ordinarily would have to disburse monies to them for them to also pay for their energy bills. But as we have seen, even in the past week, there are a lot of ministries, departments, and agencies, any also private sector players that are heavily indebted to the electricity company of Ghana. That is why we see that the electricity company of Ghana in the past 2 weeks has been very aggressive in, going after the debt that is owed them in this, both for government side and then for the private sector side. And so the debt is coming from all fronts, not only for public institutions, but also for the private sector as well.
Okay, so now we know in the terms of this, government is attempting to restructure this $1.4 billion debt. So what type of restructuring proposal did government put to the independent power producers?
As of now, it is unclear the kind of proposal, but all that we know is that the government of Ghana wants to include IPPUs in the broader debt restructuring. In December 2022, government of Ghana secured a staff level agreement with the IMF. And so as part of it, government will have to do debt restructuring, both at the domestic side and then the external side. Government has succeeded in completing the domestic debt exchange program, but further wants to look at how best it can restructure the debt that is owed the independent power producers. But as it stands now, we don't know the specific terms that government is offering. In talking with people close to the issue, they mentioned that in the past 2 weeks there have been meetings between the Ministry of Finance and the independent power producers. But as it stands now, we don't know the specifics of how government is, engaging them to pay this debt for them to also keep the lights on for the country.
So, Emmanuel, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. If you were working with government and had to offer a restructuring proposal to the independent power producers that are owed $1.4 billion, just give me one or two components of what that restructuring deal you think, hazarding a guess, should look like or would look like if you were the one handling it.
It's difficult. Maybe I might not be privy to the details of it, but all that I can say is that what can government offer to pay now? Because it's all about liquidity. Once you're able to pay these independent power producers what you have now, and look at how best you can get to pay their arrears in the near term, I think that is what is going to help. And more importantly, in solving the broader problem of exchange rate losses, because these IPPs are owing these international banks and suppliers in dollars. And so once there is a depreciation of the cedi, it means that they will have to cough a lot of Ghana cedis to get the dollars to amortize the debt that they owe their suppliers and their creditors as well. And so for me, it will be for government to pay what it has now and look at how best as soon as possible to help pay the remaining balance they have on their books.
So as you said, this seems to be part of the larger domestic debt exchange program or restructuring situation that Ghana finds itself in. And we've seen there's been some pushback, but Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta said there's been about 80% appreciation and participation when he was speaking in mid-February. So do you think the majority of people seem to be having more of an issue of a restructuring and how they could lose some of their value? Or is it really about how government is even offering some of these things to them? Because when you talk about restructuring, does restructuring automatically mean that the person on the back end of things is the one who's going to somehow lose out? That haircuts we keep talking about, is that why it seems there's a bit of pushback when it comes to anytime the word restructuring comes up?
I must say that no investor wants to lose money. And once they are investing on a particular terms that the issuer is offering. And so when government says that I'm issuing a 5-year bond, the coupon rate is 10%, they expect that at the end of the 5 years, they will be able to get that, or even in the semi-annual payments that they would expect. So no investor wants debt restructuring. But I think the approach for government of Ghana in the initial stages wasn't too right. Debt restructuring should be a bottom-up approach, not the other way around. And so you are the one owing these, investors, and you want to call for debt restructuring. What is the level of engagement? I remember as far back in November 2022, when the issue about a possibility of debt restructuring came to the table for discussion. At the time, government should have been able to engage broadly with the investors, the various stakeholders, so that at the time you are making an announcement, they are okay with the terms. That is why we had to, postpone deadlines for about 5 times before government was able to finish the domestic debt exchange program. And so I think it's all about the approach. For domestic debt restructuring or any debt restructuring, it should be a bottom-up approach, but not the other way around.
So given the situation, you said you'd probably look at making sure government pays what it can right now, then works out a deal to pay their arrears. We have a situation where independent power producers are owing foreign clients or foreign suppliers rather, and foreign banks in dollars, and must get even more CDs now to be able to exchange those CDs to dollars. In the end of it, it's going to be about options. What options are there really for the independent power producers? What options really are there for government? And when we look at it, if we were to reach a stalemate and electricity services start to suffer, what would be the impact? What would be the effect of a potential electricity crisis or shortage on an economy that's already in this situation right now?
And as you mentioned, Ghana's economy is already in an economic recession, and we are going through economic crisis. This is not a time for even to have a conversation about energy crisis. The recent history in 2014, 2015 taught us that we lost a lot of, revenue, and a lot of businesses had to shut down at the time. And so we shouldn't get to that stalemate whereby these independent power producers will consider turning off their plants. That should not happen, at least in the short to medium term. What should happen now is that government should be committed to amortize the current debt that it's owed these independent power producers, and also work on how best we can, add options into our generation mix. There's current conversation about adding a lot of renewables. And so how can government implement a lot of policies to rake in a lot of renewable energy producers into the energy mix? And I think that is what is going to happen, or that should happen in the medium term. For a possible power, we call in our local parlance, doomsday, will not augur well for our economy. The economy is already going through economic crisis, and we don't envisage to also go through energy crisis in this current situation. And so government should be able to work assiduously to amortize the debt, at least commit what you have to pay now, and work on how you can, in the whole value chain, be able to get, the debt that is owed the value chain paid. For instance, ECG is now going after its, debtors. And it might interest you to note that for every invoice that ECG, issues, they are able to get about 45% of it. So what happens to the 55% of it? So that is where the conversation should be, so that ECG, NEDCO will be able to up their games in terms of collection, and more importantly, reduce the transmission losses and all the technical losses that they face, so that there will be a lot of efficiency in the energy sector space. And this will translate into broader efficiency in the energy production space, so that we'll be able to reduce the debt that is currently on the books in the various, value chain players in the energy sector.
All right, Emmanuel, before I let you go, let's expand this a little bit. So we know that Ghana is requesting for restructuring of its bilateral debts via the G20's Common Framework vehicle. So what do we know about the progress being made in that regard? Has this started? Because we know the criticisms of this Common Framework, that it's too slow, it takes too long, and it seems like there's really no progress. But let's hear it from you. Is there anything happening along this line?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, we don't have any updates. Ghana applied through this framework, but as you mentioned, it has been slow. I remember one of the African countries, Chad or Zambia, applied last year, but they were able to get it just a couple of months ago. And in
All right, having some technical difficulties there with my guest at the end of this conversation. As we're wrapping up the conversation, that is Emmanuel Amoah-Darkwah, economist and partner at advisory firm C-Kadd Global, as we look at what's happening with the independent power producers in Ghana and the debt they're owed by the Ghanaian government, about 1.4 billion. So just asking him about Ghana's request now with the G20 Common Framework vehicle. Is there any progress? Emmanuel, I believe you're back with me now.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so you're saying as far as you know, there has not been too much, if any, progress at all?
Too much progress. The latest information we have with this external debt restructuring is that the finance minister has traveled to China to further engage with the Chinese government to look at how best the Chinese government will be able to, restructure the debt Ghana owes China. And so that is the latest we have now, the information available to us. And so for the G20 framework, I must say that it's been quite slow with that front.
Okay, and it's interesting you mentioned the finance minister going to Ghana, because that was really my next question. Ghana happens to be one of, China, I beg your pardon, happens to be one of Ghana's largest bilateral creditors or lenders, as it may be. And that's one of the prerequisites of this IMF $3 billion loan, is to get these creditors on board. Do you think that Ghana will be able to get China and others on board? Is there any other progress other than this sort of bilateral trip that we see the finance minister going on?
Well, there are a couple of options that are on the table. If we have to look at, even with the Chinese debt, there are components of the debt. For example, Ghana has a running $2 billion Sino-Hydro deal with China. So that is not like your full-fledged commercial loan. This is sort of a barter, arrangement that the government of Ghana has with China. And so we have to look at all the various components of Ghana's indebtedness to China and look at how best Ghana will be able to make a strong case for possible restructuring or, in some cases, for debt forgiveness. So it's all about what the government of Ghana will offer. And I think that this is a time that government of Ghana should also show some level of commitment in terms of cutting the fiscal slippages we have on our hands, so that external creditors will have confidence that indeed Ghana is going through, a debt crisis. But this is our contribution to it. But government of Ghana, as I indicated, must show commitment in how they can reduce the volume of or the budget deficit we currently have on our books, so that the external creditors will also make their contribution through debt forgiveness and debt restructuring.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel, for joining me. We'll continue to follow this story, and we hope we reach a compromise with the independent power producers, because no one wants to see the lights go off anywhere across the continent.
Definitely.
All right. Thank you so much. And it's a conversation that will continue. Ghana continues to find itself seeking that $3 billion loan from the IMF, but owing close to that to independent power producers in the country who say that if they are not paid, they can't guarantee the continued availability of light. And an economy that is facing what it's facing, an energy crisis, would not be anything that we want. We'll continue to watch all of this play out. So you are watching, of course, Business Edge, and this is how we'll wrap things up for today. Don't forget to follow us on social media at News Central TV. You can download our mobile app. You can go to our website. And, of course, you can watch us on many, many platforms across the continent and even outside. At 12 p.m. West African time, you get News Central Now. Until next time, I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. Have a fantastic day.